In the vast expanse of the Galactic Educational Consortium, where species from 1,000 worlds gather to learn the ways of civilized society, there exists a universal truth that every alien child learns before they can properly hold a data pad. Humans are the monsters that lurk in the dark corners of space. They call them Deathworlders, beings spawned from a planet so hostile that merely existing there requires the kind of biological adaptations that would give nightmares to most sentient species. Earth, they whisper, is a world where the very air can kill, where massive predators roam freely, and where the dominant species evolved not just to survive, but to hunt everything else into submission. So when the Galactic Educational Consortium's most prestigious academy, New Geneva Station, received its first human exchange student, the faculty didn't know whether to celebrate this historic moment of interspecies cooperation or to quietly update their emergency protocols. What they definitely didn't expect was that their biggest concern wouldn't be the human student adapting to alien society. It would be alien society adapting to what happens when a human gets entertained. Because when a Zephyrian assassin, trained from birth to be the perfect killer, equipped with technology that could level city blocks, and carrying genetic modifications that made him faster and stronger than any natural-born being, decided to take a classroom full of alien students hostage, he made one critical error in his planning. He assumed the human would be just as terrified as everyone else. Marcus Chen, 17-year-old exchange student from the third planet of the Sol system, looked at the 8-foot-tall killing machine that had just vaporized the classroom door and made demands that would make galactic headlines, and did something that would fundamentally change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. He started laughing. Not the nervous laughter of someone in shock, not the hysterical giggling of someone who had lost their mind, but the genuine, delighted laughter of someone who had just discovered that their boring Tuesday was about to become very, very interesting. And in that moment, every alien in that classroom realized that perhaps they had been afraid of the wrong species all along. The morning started like any other at New Geneva Station's Academy for Interspecies Understanding. The massive space station, positioned at the crossroads of 3 major hyperspace routes, hummed with the daily activities of over 2 million beings from across the galaxy. In Classroom 7 Delta, advanced xenocultural studies was about to begin, and the mix of species represented the very best of galactic diversity. Professor Vexhai, an elderly Altarian with skin like polished copper and 4 arms that moved with practiced efficiency, was distributing data pads containing the day's lesson on conflict resolution among primitive species. Her students, representing 15 different worlds and twice as many distinct evolutionary paths, settled into their adaptive seating with the comfortable routine of the academically privileged. In the third row, Zilnara from the aquatic world of Kepler 442b adjusted her environmental suit's humidity controls while reviewing her notes. The young Keplerian's translucent blue skin shimmered as her gill slits opened and closed in a rhythm that indicated focused concentration. Beside her, Thokmer, a granite-born whose rocky exterior made him look like a mobile boulder, was carefully polishing his optical sensors with a specialized cloth. Near the back of the classroom, a cluster of vegan Unity students huddled together, their plant-like appendages intertwining in their species' equivalent of nervous hand-holding. The 3 of them, Bloomzara, Roothin, and Petallix, had been inseparable since their arrival at the Academy 6 months ago. Their homeworld's peaceful nature had produced beings of extraordinary empathy but minimal experience with conflict of any kind. In the front row, as always, sat the Crystalline Collective's representative, a being of living mineral named Quartzinger whose body caught and refracted light in patterns that served as their species' primary form of communication. The rainbow patterns flowing across their surface indicated deep thought mixed with anticipation for the day's intellectual challenges. And then there was Marcus Chen. The human sat in the middle of the room, looking remarkably ordinary by the standards of his homeworld, but absolutely extraordinary by the standards of everyone else present. At 17 Earth years old, he stood just under 6 feet tall, massive by the standards of most species, average by the standards of his own. His brown hair was cut short in what his species called a practical style, and his dark eyes held an alertness that many of his classmates found unsettling. Marcus had been on New Geneva Station for 3 months now, part of the first human exchange program in galactic history. The program itself was controversial, Many species believed that allowing Deathworlders into civilian educational facilities was inherently dangerous. Others argued that understanding humanity was crucial to the galaxy's future, especially given Earth's recent emergence as a significant political and economic power. The compromise had been to allow exactly one human student, carefully selected and extensively screened, to attend the academy under strict supervision. Marcus had been chosen not because he was exceptional by human standards, but because he was decidedly average. Average intelligence, average physical capabilities, average temperament. The selection committee had reasoned that if they could successfully integrate an average human into galactic society, it would prove that the species as a whole could be trusted. What they hadn't accounted for was that average, by human standards, was extraordinary by almost everyone else's. Professor Vexai had nearly finished distributing the data pads when the classroom's environmental systems registered an anomaly. The air filtration units, designed to maintain optimal atmospheric conditions for all species present, detected trace amounts of compounds that shouldn't exist in a controlled environment. The computer systems flagged the readings as potentially dangerous, but before the automated safety protocols could engage, the classroom door simply vanished. It didn't slide open. It didn't explode outward. One moment it was there, a solid barrier of reinforced metal and composite materials, and the next moment it was gone, reduced to its component atoms by a weapon that most of the galaxy's military forces could only dream of possessing. Through the empty doorway stepped Kexville Shadowstrike, though none of the classroom's occupants knew his name yet. What they saw was 8 feet of perfectly engineered death, a Zephyrian assassin whose very existence violated a dozen interstellar treaties. His species had been banned from most civilized worlds after their homeworld had attempted to conquer half the galaxy through biological warfare and targeted assassination campaigns. The Zephyrians had lost that war, but survivors like Kexville had adapted. His body had been modified beyond recognition from his species' baseline. Synthetic muscle fibers gave him strength that could crush steel. Neural implants provided reaction times measured in microseconds. Optical enhancements allowed him to see across multiple spectrums simultaneously. And his weapons, a collection of devices that represented the cutting edge of destructive technology, were integrated directly into his anatomy. But most terrifying of all were his claws. Each of his 8 fingers ended in a retractable talon made from harvested neutronium, sharp enough to cut through molecular bonds themselves. They could slice through any known armor, any defensive barrier, any living tissue, as easily as a hot knife through ice. The students' reactions were immediate and predictable. Zilnara's environmental suit began cycling rapidly as her body prepared for underwater escape, even though they were in space. Thokmar's rocky exterior darkened to its maximum defensive coloration. The vegan unity students intertwined so tightly that they formed a single, trembling mass of green vegetation. Quartzizinger's light patterns shifted to the deep purples and blacks that indicated terror in their species' visual language. Professor Vexai, despite her advanced age and academic background, had enough survival instinct to immediately activate her personal emergency beacon. The action was subtle, a simple gesture that appeared to be reaching for her data pad, but actually triggered a distress signal that should bring station security within minutes. "No," said Kexville, and his voice carried harmonics that spoke directly to the fear centers of most species' brains. "That won't be necessary." He had noticed her movement, of course. Assassins of his caliber noticed everything. With casual efficiency, he extended one claw and sliced through the air. The motion looked almost lazy, but it generated a targeted electromagnetic pulse that disabled every electronic device in the room. Data pads went dark. Environmental suits switched to emergency power. The emergency beacon died with a small pop of displaced air. "Much better," Kexville continued, moving with fluid grace to the center of the room. His movements were predatory, each step calculated to demonstrate his complete control over the situation. "Now we can have an uninterrupted conversation." Professor Vexai, drawing on decades of experience dealing with difficult students and dangerous situations, attempted to maintain some semblance of authority. "I don't know who you are or what you want, but this is a place of learning. These are children. They have nothing to do with whatever grievance you might have." Kexville's laugh was the sound of grinding metal. "Children, perhaps, but very special children. Do you know what we have here, Professor?" We have the sons and daughters of diplomats, military leaders, corporate executives, and planetary governors, the future leadership of a dozen worlds, all conveniently gathered in one location. His optical implants swept across the room, identifying each student with machine precision. Zilnara Deepcurrent, daughter of the Keplerian defense minister. Thokmar Ironside, heir to the largest mining consortium in the granite systems. The vegan Unity triplets, whose parents control agricultural export for their entire sector. Quartzinger Prismlight, child of the crystalline collective's high resonator. Each identification sent another wave of terror through the classroom. This wasn't a random attack. This was targeted, planned, precise. And then, Kexville continued, his gaze settling on the back of the room, we have our special guest, the first human to attend a galactic institution of higher learning. Marcus Chen, son of nobody particularly important but valuable precisely because of what he represents. During this entire exchange, Marcus had remained perfectly still. While his classmates trembled or prepared for flight, while the professor attempted to maintain control, while the assassin delivered his monologue, the human had simply sat in his chair and observed. Now, with the assassin's attention focused on him, Marcus did something that surprised everyone in the room, including Kexville. He smiled. You know, Marcus said, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent classroom, this is probably the most interesting thing that's happened since I got here. The statement was so unexpected, so completely at odds with the situation, that for a moment nobody moved. Even Kexville paused, his predatory monologue interrupted by the sheer incongruity of the human's response. I mean, Marcus continued, apparently oblivious to the 8-foot-tall killing machine staring at him, don't get me wrong, the classes have been educational and all. Learning about different species, their cultures, their histories, fascinating stuff. But let's be honest, most of it has been pretty theoretical. He gestured around the room with the casual air of someone commenting on the weather. Advanced xenocultural studies, interspecies diplomatic protocol, comparative evolutionary biology, all very academic. Not a lot of practical application, you know. Kexville's head tilted slightly, a motion that in his species indicated confusion mixed with growing anger. You seem to misunderstand the situation, human. I'm holding you and your classmates hostage. You should be afraid. Marcus considered this for a moment, then nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, I can see how you might think that. And I'm sure my classmates are terrified, no offense, guys, but most of your species evolved on what we would call nice planets. Garden worlds, ocean worlds, crystal worlds, places where the biggest threat was probably resource scarcity or maybe the occasional natural disaster. He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. But here's the thing, I'm from Earth. Do you know what Earth is like? Before Kexville could respond, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing an interesting anecdote. Earth is a death world. Not the worst death world in the galaxy, mind you, but definitely in the top 10%. We've got whether that can level cities, predators that hunt in packs, diseases that can wipe out entire populations, and enough natural disasters to keep things interesting. His smile widened slightly. And do you know what humans did when faced with all of that? We didn't just survive, we thrived. We turned the predators into livestock, we harnessed the weather. We conquered the diseases. We built cities in places that should be uninhabitable and called them home. The classroom had gone completely silent. Even the ambient sounds of the space station seemed muted, as if the universe itself was listening to the human's words. So when I look at you, Marcus continued, his dark eyes meeting the assassin's optical implants without flinching, I don't see a terrifying killer. I see an interesting puzzle. You're obviously enhanced. Those aren't natural muscle fibers, and I'm guessing those claws are some kind of exotic matter composite. Your movement patterns suggest combat training, probably from childhood. Your speech patterns indicate you're trying to project authority through intimidation. He paused, appearing to think. The weapon you used on the door was probably a molecular disruptor of some kind, definitely military grade, probably stolen or black market. The electromagnetic pulse that disabled our electronics was targeted and controlled, which means you have excellent fine motor control over your enhanced systems. Kexville had stopped moving entirely. In his long career as an assassin, he had encountered fear, anger, desperation, and even defiance, but he had never encountered analysis. The question is, Marcus said, leaning forward slightly with the air of someone genuinely curious about the answer, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here? Because if this is just about taking hostages, there are much easier targets on the station. If it's about making a political statement, a classroom of students doesn't really give you the media impact you'd want. If it's about revenge against the Galactic Educational Consortium specifically, then you're probably looking for someone higher up the administrative chain. He tilted his head, mirroring Kexville's earlier gesture. So either this is personal or it's part of something bigger, and honestly, either option is kind of exciting. The last word hung in the air like a challenge. Around the room, Marcus's classmates stared at him with expressions that ranged from horrified disbelief to dawning comprehension. Professor Vexhi's forearms had gone completely still, a sign of intense concentration in her species. And Kexville's Shadow Strike, trained killer and enhanced predator, found himself in the unprecedented position of being uncertain how to respond to his intended victim's complete lack of fear. "You think this is exciting?" he asked, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. Marcus's grin was pure human predator. "Oh, absolutely. See, back on Earth we have this saying, 'May you live in interesting times.' Most people think it's a blessing, but it's actually a curse, because interesting times are usually dangerous times." He stood up from his chair, a movement so smooth and confident that several of his classmates gasped. "But here's the thing about humans, we don't just live in interesting times, we create them." And in that moment, as a 17-year-old human faced down a genetically enhanced assassin with nothing but curiosity and confidence, everyone in classroom 7 Delta began to understand that perhaps they had been asking the wrong question about humanity's place in the galaxy. The question wasn't whether humans could be trusted to integrate into galactic civilization. The question was whether galactic civilization was ready for humanity. The silence that followed Marcus's declaration stretched for exactly 3.7 seconds, long enough for Kexville's enhanced neural implants to process 17 different response scenarios, and for every other occupant of the room to fully grasp that their situation had just shifted in ways they didn't understand. Kexville's first instinct was to eliminate the threat. His combat programming identified the human's lack of fear as either advanced psychological warfare or dangerous mental instability, both of which required immediate neutralization. His claws extended to their full length, neutronium edges gleaming under the classroom's artificial lighting. But something made him pause. Perhaps it was professional curiosity. In 3 decades of assassination work, he had never encountered a target who responded to mortal danger with academic interest. Perhaps it was tactical caution. The human's confidence suggested hidden capabilities or backup plans. Or perhaps it was simply the unprecedented nature of the situation that engaged parts of his mind that pure programming couldn't suppress. Marcus, meanwhile, had begun walking slowly around the room, his movement casual but purposeful. To the terrified aliens watching, it looked like he was simply stretching his legs. To Kexville's enhanced perceptions, it looked like a predator evaluating terrain. "You know what's really fascinating about this whole situation?" Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to the fact that an 8-foot killing machine was tracking his every move. "It's the cultural implications. I mean, here you are, probably the most dangerous individual any of my classmates have ever encountered, and you chose to start with a monologue." He paused near Zilnara's seat, offering the trembling Keplerian a reassuring smile before continuing his circuit. "That's classic villain behavior by Earth standards. The whole, 'let me explain my plan and demonstrate my superiority' thing. We have entire entertainment genres built around that trope." Professor Vexhi, despite her terror, found herself listening with the part of her mind that had spent decades studying cultural patterns. The human's analysis was disturbingly accurate. The assassin had indeed followed behavioral patterns that matched what Earth literature called classical antagonist reveals. "But here's what's interesting," Marcus continued, now near the back wall of the classroom. "In human culture, when the villain starts monologuing, it means the hero is about to turn the tables. It's such a consistent pattern that we actually have a term for it, villainous exposition syndrome." Kexville's optical implants narrowed. "I am not performing for your entertainment, human. I am demonstrating control over the situation." Right, Marcus nodded agreeably. "But see, that's where the cultural disconnect comes in. You're demonstrating control in a way that my species has been conditioned to recognize as a setup for dramatic reversal. It's like you're following a script that ends with your defeat." The casual confidence in his voice sent chills through the room, but for different reasons depending on the listener. His classmates were terrified that he was antagonizing their captor. Professor Vexhai was beginning to suspect that there might be more to human psychology than the academic literature suggested. And Kexville was starting to wonder if he had fundamentally misunderstood what he was dealing with. "You speak of defeat as if it were possible," the assassin said, his voice carrying harmonics designed to induce paralytic fear. "I have killed beings far more dangerous than a human adolescent." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "I don't doubt that. Your kill count is probably impressive by galactic standards, but tell me how many of those kills were humans." The question was simple, but it carried implications that made everyone in the room suddenly pay closer attention. Kexville's enhanced memory systems provided the answer immediately. 0. Humans had only been known to the galaxy for a few decades, and contact had been limited to carefully controlled diplomatic and trade interactions. "None," Kexville admitted, "but I have studied your species' capabilities. I know your physical limitations." Marcus's laugh was genuinely delighted. "Oh, that's beautiful. You've studied our capabilities from external observations and maybe some biological scans. Let me guess, average human strength, speed, reaction time, all within predictable parameters." He began walking again, but this time his movement had a different quality. Where before he had seemed casual, now there was a subtle precision to his steps, a way of moving that suggested complete awareness of everyone and everything in the room. "Here's the thing about humans," Marcus said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a complex concept. "We're not actually that impressive individually. There are species that are stronger, faster, tougher, smarter. What makes us special isn't our physical capabilities." He paused near Thokmer's seat, and the young Granite-born couldn't help but notice that the human's positioning put him at an angle where he could see both the assassin and the room's emergency exits simultaneously. "What makes us special is that we're adaptable. Not just evolutionarily, though we are, but cognitively. We're pattern recognition specialists. We see a new situation, we identify the variables, and we figure out how to exploit them." Zulnara, despite her terror, found herself following the human's logic. Her species were excellent analytical thinkers, and even through her fear, she could see that Marcus was doing exactly what he described, analyzing the situation for exploitable variables. "For example," Marcus continued, "I've been in this room for 3 months. I know that the air circulation system has 17 different intake points, and that the emergency lighting has a 12-second delay when the main power is disrupted. I know that Professor Vexhai keeps a personal defense weapon in her desk's second drawer, standard academy protocol for faculty dealing with potentially dangerous students." Professor Vexhai's forearms twitched involuntarily. The weapon was indeed there, though she had hoped no one knew about it. "I know that the classroom's structural supports are designed to handle artificial gravity failures, which means they're reinforced beyond normal atmospheric pressure requirements. I know that the floor plating is designed to be quickly removable for maintenance access to the station's infrastructure." As he spoke, Marcus's casual tour of the room began to make more sense to those watching. He wasn't randomly walking around. He was demonstrating his knowledge of tactical positions and escape routes. "Most importantly," Marcus said, stopping directly in the center of the room, equidistant from the assassin and all potential cover points, "I know that station security is required to respond to classroom emergencies within 4 minutes of detection, and that the response team includes at least 2 members trained in hostage negotiation and 3 equipped with non-lethal restraint systems." Kexville's head turned slightly, a motion that indicated he was accessing his chronometer implants. "It has been 6 minutes since I disabled your professor's emergency beacon." "True," Marcus agreed. "But what you didn't account for is that human students are required to check in with their dormitory supervisor every 4 hours as part of the exchange program's safety protocols. My next check-in was scheduled for—" He glanced at where his wrist display would be if it hadn't been disabled. "About 3 minutes ago." The implications of this statement rippled through the room. Even if the classroom's emergency systems had been disabled, the human's absence from his scheduled check-in would trigger additional safety protocols. "Additionally," Marcus continued, seemingly unaware of the growing tension in Kexville's posture, "the Academy's computer systems are designed with redundant monitoring for exactly this kind of situation. When you used that molecular disruptor on the door, it registered as a potential hull breach. When you disabled our electronics with electromagnetic pulse, it registered as potential sabotage. The automated systems have already isolated this section and begun emergency protocols. Professor Vexhai stared at the human in amazement. In 3 months of classes, he had demonstrated competent but unremarkable academic performance. She had never suspected that he was conducting a detailed security analysis of the facility. "So," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity, "what's your exit strategy? Because unless you have some way of getting off the station that doesn't involve the main docking bays, transport systems, or emergency pods, all of which are currently locked down, you're essentially trapped here with us." For the first time since entering the classroom, Kexville felt something approaching uncertainty. His enhanced tactical systems had indeed planned for various contingencies, but they had assumed a much simpler scenario. The presence of a single human student had been factored into his mission planning as a minor complication, not as a primary threat assessment. "You assume I need to escape," Kexville said, his claws extending and retracting in a rhythmic pattern that indicated stress in his species. "Perhaps my mission parameters don't require survival." Marcus tilted his head, considering this. "Suicide mission? That's possible, but it doesn't fit the pattern. If you just wanted to kill a bunch of students, there are much more efficient methods. The fact that you're here, talking to us, means you want something that requires us to be alive, at least temporarily." He began walking again, but now his movement had changed once more. Where before he had been analytical and then tactical, now he moved with a predatory grace that made several of his classmates unconsciously lean away from him. "Let me offer an alternative hypothesis," Marcus said. "You're not here to kill us. You're here to take us somewhere else. The hostage scenario is just phase 1. You're waiting for something, either for security to arrive so you can make demands or for some kind of extraction team to collect us." Quartzizinger's light patterns suddenly shifted to rapid amber pulses, the crystalline collective equivalent of sudden understanding. Despite their terror, the living mineral's analytical mind had been following Marcus's logic, and the human's conclusion matched their own calculations. "But here's where your plan has a problem," Marcus continued. "It's based on the assumption that your hostages will behave predictably. That will be too scared to think clearly, too panicked to take action, too alien to understand human tactical thinking." He stopped walking and faced Kexville directly, his posture relaxed but somehow radiating confidence. "The thing is, I'm not scared, I'm not panicked, and I'm definitely not too alien to understand human tactical thinking." The room's atmosphere had changed completely from when the assassin had first entered. Where there had been terror and helplessness, now there was a strange sense of anticipation. Marcus's classmates were still afraid, but they were also beginning to hope that maybe, just maybe, their human friend might actually have a plan. "You want to know what I think?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the same casual tone he might use to discuss weekend plans. "I think you've made the classic mistake of underestimating your opposition because they don't look like a threat." Kexville's posture shifted subtly, his enhanced reflexes preparing for potential action. "And what exactly do you think you can do about it, human? You have no weapons, no armor, no enhancements. You are flesh and blood against engineered perfection." Marcus's smile was brilliant and terrifying. "See, that's where you're wrong. I do have a weapon. I have the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy." He tapped the side of his head with one finger. "I have a human brain that's had 3 months to study this facility and 17 years to learn how to turn any situation into an advantage." The pause that followed was electric with tension. Around the room, alien students who had spent months learning to see Marcus as a friendly, slightly exotic classmate were beginning to understand that they might never have truly known him at all. "Besides," Marcus added, his voice carrying a note of genuine anticipation, "you said it yourself, I'm from a death world. Fighting for survival isn't something I learned in school. It's something I inherited from every generation of humans who came before me." And in that moment, Kexville Shadowstrike, enhanced assassin and trained killer, began to suspect that he might have just made the worst mistake of his very long career. He had expected to face a classroom of terrified children and one harmless human exchange student. Instead, he was beginning to realize that he had just initiated a confrontation with a predator who had been studying the hunting ground for months. and was genuinely excited about the opportunity to test his skills against worthy prey. The moment of truth arrived with the subtle vibration of heavy footsteps in the corridor outside. Station security had finally arrived, their approach announced by the methodical rhythm of boots on metal plating that any experienced spacer would recognize. Kexful's enhanced hearing had detected them 30 seconds before anyone else in the room, but Marcus's slight smile suggested he had been expecting them. "Right on time," Marcus murmured, just loudly enough for the assassin to hear. 18 minutes from initial breach to security response. Not bad for a civilian facility, but slower than military standard. Kexful's tactical systems immediately shifted to threat assessment mode. Through the classroom's destroyed doorway, he could identify at least 6 distinct footfall patterns, suggesting a full security team. His optical implants detected the electromagnetic signatures of standard issue stunners, riot shields, and personal protective equipment. "Station security to Classroom 7 Delta," came a voice through an external speaker system. "We have reports of a disturbance. Please respond." The assassin moved with liquid grace to a position where he could address the corridor while maintaining visual control over his hostages. "I am Kexful Shadow Strike of the Zephyrian Liberation Front. I am holding 17 students and 1 faculty member. Any attempt to enter this room will result in casualties." Professor Vexhi's forearms trembled as the situation escalated beyond academic crisis into genuine interstellar incident. The Zephyrian Liberation Front was considered a terrorist organization by most galactic governments, and their involvement meant this was no longer a simple hostage situation. "We understand your position," came the careful reply from the corridor. "We're bringing in a negotiator. Please don't harm the students. They're not responsible for whatever grievances you might have." Marcus watched this exchange with the detached interest of someone observing a fascinating experiment. His classmates noticed that while they were all focused on the door and the voices from the corridor, the human's attention kept shifting to other parts of the room: the air vents, the floor panels, the emergency lighting systems. "Actually," Marcus said conversationally, "I'm curious about something. Kexful Shadow Strike, that's not your real name, is it?" The assassin's head snapped toward him, optical implants focusing with mechanical precision. "What did you say?" "The name," Marcus explained, settling into his chair with the casual air of someone starting an interesting discussion. "Shadow Strike is obviously a chosen designation, very dramatic, very intimidating. But Kexful is interesting, that's old Zephyrian, isn't it? Specifically, it means blade dancer in the ceremonial dialect." Around the room, several students stared at the human in amazement. Zilnara, whose aquatic species had developed sophisticated linguistic analysis capabilities, realized that Marcus was demonstrating knowledge of xenolinguistics that he had never shown in class. "Someone gave you that name when you were very young," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone solving an interesting puzzle. "Probably before the genetic modifications, definitely before the neural implants, which means you weren't born an assassin, you were made into one." Kexful's claws extended involuntarily, a stress response that his enhanced systems couldn't completely suppress. "Your analysis is irrelevant to the current situation." "Is it though?" Marcus asked. "Because I'm starting to think this isn't really about the Zephyrian Liberation Front at all. This is personal, isn't it? Someone hired you for a specific job, and you're using the terrorist angle as cover." The silence that followed was filled with the quiet hum of station systems and the barely audible sound of security personnel taking positions in the corridor. But underneath those familiar sounds was something new, the barely detectable whisper of air moving through spaces it shouldn't be able to access. Marcus's smile widened slightly. "You know what's really interesting about space stations? They're basically giant machines designed to keep people alive in an environment that's constantly trying to kill them. Everything is connected: life support, power systems, structural integrity, waste management. It's all one big, complex, interdependent network." He gestured around the room with apparent casualness. "Take this classroom, for example. It connects to the main corridor, obviously, but it also connects to the air circulation system, the power grid, the waste recycling network, and the emergency evacuation routes. Most people never think about those connections because they're hidden behind panels and bulkheads." Professor Vexhi found herself following the human's logic despite her terror. Her species' four-armed physiology had evolved for complex problem-solving, and even in crisis, she couldn't help but admire the sophisticated analysis Marcus was presenting. But if you know how to access those connections, Marcus continued, a space station becomes less like a fortress and more like a three-dimensional maze with multiple entry and exit points for anyone clever enough to use them. Kexville's enhanced perception systems suddenly registered anomalous readings from multiple directions. The air circulation patterns in the room had changed subtly. The electromagnetic signatures from the corridor suggested more personnel than a standard security response would require. And most concerning of all, his tactical software was identifying potential breach points that hadn't existed in his original assessment of the classroom. The thing about humans, Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of genuine pride in his species, is that we're natural engineers. We see a system, we figure out how it works, and then we figure out how to make it work better for us. It's what we do. From the corridor came the sound of careful movement security personnel repositioning themselves based on new intelligence or changing tactical requirements. But the movement patterns were wrong for a standard containment operation. They were too coordinated, too precise, too much like military rather than civilian security. "You're stalling," Kexville accused, though his voice carried less certainty than it had earlier. Marcus shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just enjoying the conversation. It's not every day I get to meet someone with your particular skill set. The genetic modifications alone must have been fascinating. How do you handle the metabolic requirements of those muscle fibers? And the neural implants, do they interface directly with your organic nervous system, or is there a buffer layer to prevent rejection?" The casual questions, delivered with genuine scientific curiosity, were somehow more unnerving than any threat or challenge would have been. Kexville found himself in the unprecedented position of being analyzed like a laboratory specimen by what should have been his victim. "You're trying to keep me distracted while your security forces prepare some kind of assault," the assassin said. But even as he spoke, his enhanced tactical systems were registering data that didn't support that theory. "Actually," Marcus said, "I'm trying to figure out why you haven't killed anyone yet." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the room, alien students who had been focused on their own terror suddenly found themselves considering the implications of what their human classmate had observed. "Think about it," Marcus continued. "You've been here for almost 20 minutes. You have 17 terrified students, most of whom come from species with minimal combat capabilities. You have weapons that could eliminate all of us in seconds, but nobody's been hurt." He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes fixed on the assassin with uncomfortable intensity. "Either you're showing remarkable restraint for a terrorist, or killing us isn't actually part of your plan." Quartzizinger's light patterns suddenly shifted to rapid calculation sequences as the crystalline collective student's analytical mind processed this observation. The human was right for someone allegedly representing a violent extremist organization. Kexville had been remarkably nonviolent. "My mission parameters require live subjects," Kexville admitted, his voice carrying harmonics of frustration. "Dead hostages serve no purpose for extraction." The word extraction sent a chill through the room, but Marcus's expression brightened with genuine interest. "Extraction? So I was right, you're not here to make demands or send messages. You're here to take us somewhere else." He stood up from his chair again, and this time the motion carried a different quality. Where before he had seemed casual or analytical, now there was something predatory in his posture that made even his classmates nervous. "But here's the interesting part," Marcus said, beginning to pace again. "Extraction operations require careful timing, specific transportation assets, and usually some kind of outside support, all of which suggests that this isn't a solo operation." From the corridor came the sound of new arrivals, heavier footsteps, different equipment signatures, voices speaking in languages that the classroom's translation systems couldn't immediately process. "Those aren't station security personnel," Marcus observed with satisfaction. "Those are your extraction team, aren't they? Which means we're about to transition from Phase 1 of your operation to Phase 2. Kexville's optical implants registered the human's complete lack of fear with growing confusion. By all logic, the arrival of additional hostile forces should have increased the student's terror, not decreased it. "You seem pleased by this development," the assassin noted. Marcus's grin was brilliant and slightly unhinged. Oh, I am? See, this is where things get really interesting. Because now we have multiple hostile forces, complex tactical considerations, and a time-sensitive situation with rapidly changing variables. He gestured toward the destroyed doorway where new sounds suggested significant activity. This is the kind of scenario that human military academies use for advanced tactical training. Multi-vector threat assessment, resource limitation exercises, asymmetric warfare simulations. The packing had brought him closer to several of his classmates, and they noticed that his movement patterns were positioning him between them and potential lines of fire from the doorway. Despite his casual demeanor, the human was unconsciously taking a protective stance. The thing is, Marcus continued, his voice carrying a note of anticipation, I may just be a student, but I'm a student from a species that has been fighting wars for our entire recorded history. And on Earth, we have a saying about cornered animals. Kexful's enhanced reflexes suddenly detected multiple simultaneous changes in the room's environmental conditions. Air pressure fluctuations suggested movement in spaces that should have been sealed. Electromagnetic readings indicated the activation of systems that should have been disabled. Temperature variations suggested the presence of additional heat sources. They fight back, Marcus finished, and his smile was no longer entirely human. In that moment, as exotic weapons charged in the corridor and extraction teams prepared for Phase 2 of their operation, everyone in Classroom 7 Delta realized that the most dangerous element in the room might not be the genetically enhanced assassin with neutronium claws. It might be the 17-year-old human who had just finished turning a hostage crisis into a tactical exercise and was looking forward to the practical application of everything his species had learned about warfare over the past several thousand years. The first indication that Marcus had been doing more than just talking came when the classroom's emergency lighting system activated in a pattern that station security definitely hadn't programmed. Instead of the standard steady illumination, the lights began cycling in a complex sequence. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short again. SOS, Zilnara whispered, her aquatic species' natural affinity for pattern recognition allowing her to identify the ancient Earth distress signal. But even as she recognized it, she realized something was wrong. The signal wasn't being broadcast randomly. It was being directed through the station's optical communication network with surgical precision. Kexful's enhanced systems registered the anomaly immediately, but his analysis protocols struggled to categorize it. The light pattern was clearly intentional, but it didn't match any known escape attempt or security bypass procedure in his extensive tactical database. Clever, Marcus said approvingly, as if commenting on a student's successful exam answer. But that's just the opening move. The assassin spun toward him, neutronium claws extending to combat length. What did you do? Me, nothing directly, Marcus replied with genuine cheerfulness. But 3 months of attending classes gives you a lot of time to make friends with the maintenance staff, especially when you're curious about how things work and willing to help with routine repairs. Professor Vexhai felt a chill of comprehension ripple through her forearms. The human student had indeed been remarkably helpful during the semester, volunteering for cleanup duties and showing unusual interest in the building's infrastructure. She had assumed it was simply conscientiousness. You see, Marcus continued, settling into his chair as if preparing for a lecture, humans have this thing about understanding our environment. We're not comfortable until we know how everything around us works, where the power comes from, how the air gets recycled, what happens to the waste, where all the emergency systems connect. From the corridor came the sound of the extraction team establishing positions. Kexful's enhanced hearing could distinguish at least 8 distinct individuals, armed with weapons that registered as military-grade plasma rifles and personal shield generators. Whatever organization had hired him clearly had significant resources. So when I started attending classes here, Marcus said, apparently oblivious to the heavily armed aliens taking positions outside. Naturally, I wanted to understand how New Geneva Station operates, not just the public areas, the whole system. He gestured around the room with casual pride. Did you know that every classroom has direct access to 17 different maintenance networks? Air circulation, power distribution, water recycling, waste management, emergency evacuation, structural monitoring, environmental control, communication systems, security networks, fire suppression, artificial gravity control, radiation shielding, computer core access, cargo handling, personnel transport, and external sensor arrays. As he listed each system, Marcus's classmates began to notice subtle changes in their environment. The air circulation had indeed shifted, creating gentle currents that seemed to flow in directions that defied the room's apparent layout. The temperature was fluctuating in patterns that suggested manipulation of the environmental controls. Even the artificial gravity seemed slightly different, as if the station's massive generators were operating under modified parameters. Most species only use 2 or 3 of those networks, Marcus continued conversationally. Humans, on the other hand, see all 17 as potential tools. We're very creative that way. Kexvil's tactical systems were now registering anomalies throughout the station's infrastructure. The electromagnetic readings suggested massive power redistributions that didn't correspond to any standard operational protocols. His optical implants detected movement in spaces that should have been inaccessible. Most concerning of all, his communication link with the extraction team was experiencing intermittent interference that his equipment couldn't identify or compensate for. "The really beautiful part," Marcus said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone explaining a particularly elegant solution, "is that space stations are designed with redundant systems specifically to prevent single points of failure. But that same redundancy means that if you understand the connections between systems, you can create cascading effects that propagate throughout the entire structure." From somewhere in the station's depths came a low rumble that seemed to resonate through the deck plating. The sound was subtle enough that most species would dismiss it as normal operational noise, but Kexvil's enhanced senses recognized it as something that shouldn't exist, a harmonic vibration that suggested structural systems operating outside their design parameters. "What exactly are you doing?" the assassin demanded, his voice carrying harmonics of genuine concern for the first time since entering the classroom. Marcus tilted his head thoughtfully. "Well, that depends on how you define doing. If you mean am I actively manipulating station systems from this classroom, then no, I don't have access to those controls from here." He paused, his smile taking on a distinctly predatory quality. "But if you mean did I spend the last 3 months carefully documenting system vulnerabilities and establishing relationships with people who do have access to those controls, then yes. Absolutely." The implications of this statement sent ripples of amazement and terror through the room in equal measure. Marcus's classmates were beginning to understand that their mild-mannered human friend had been conducting an intelligence operation of staggering complexity, while appearing to be nothing more than a dedicated student. "You see," Marcus continued, "humans have another saying, proper preparation prevents poor performance. We're very big on contingency planning." The rumbling from the station's infrastructure was getting stronger, and now it was accompanied by subtle changes in air pressure that suggested massive atmospheric redistributions. The emergency lighting systems were cycling through patterns that seemed random, but carried an underlying structure that suggested coded communication. So when I realized that attending an alien academy might potentially expose me to dangerous situations, and let's face it, space is inherently dangerous even without hostile actors, I took some basic precautions. Kexvil's communication systems suddenly crackled to life, with voices speaking urgent Zephyrian. The extraction team was reporting problems, security doors that wouldn't respond to their override codes, transportation systems that had mysteriously developed mechanical failures, and sensor networks that were providing contradictory information about station layout and personnel locations. "The first precaution was intelligence gathering," Marcus said, counting off on his fingers as if listing homework assignments. "Learn the station layout, understand the operational procedures, identify key personnel and critical systems. Basic stuff." Another finger went up. Second was relationship building. Make friends with maintenance staff, security personnel, administrative assistants, and anyone else who keeps this place running. Humans are social creatures. We naturally build networks. A third finger joined the count. Third was capability assessment. Figure out what resources are available, what systems can be accessed or influenced, and what kinds of scenarios I might need to prepare for. The fourth finger extended with particular satisfaction. And fourth was contingency development. Create response plans for various threat scenarios and establish the means to implement them if necessary. From the corridor came the sound of the extraction team encountering their first serious obstacle, security blast doors that had sealed without authorization and refused to respond to any attempts to override them. The muffled sounds of plasma weapons firing at reinforced barriers indicated that whatever Marcus had arranged was working exactly as intended. The beautiful thing about space stations, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the pride of someone who genuinely loved problem-solving, is that they're basically giant computers with life support systems attached. And humans, as I mentioned, are really good with computers. Quartzizinger's light patterns suddenly shifted to rapid amber sequences as the crystalline collective student realized the full implications of what they were hearing. The human hadn't just been studying the station's physical systems. He had been analyzing its computational and social networks as well. "How many people are helping you?" Professor Vexai asked, her forearms gesturing in patterns that indicated profound confusion mixed with reluctant admiration. Marcus appeared to consider the question seriously. "Define helping. If you mean people who know they're participating in a coordinated response to a hostile situation, then maybe 30 or 40. But if you mean people who are simply doing their jobs based on information I've provided or relationships I've cultivated, then probably several hundred." The number was staggering. In 3 months, the human had apparently built a network of contacts and allies that spanned the station's entire operational structure. More than that, he had done it so subtly that nobody had recognized what was happening. "That's impossible," Kexville said, but his voice carried less certainty than it had before. "Our intelligence indicated that you were isolated, friendless, struggling to adapt to alien society." Marcus laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "Oh, that's because you were using the wrong metrics. Most alien species evaluate social integration based on formal relationships, official friendships, documented associations, recorded interactions." He gestured around the room at his classmates, who were staring at him with expressions ranging from amazed terror to terrified amazement. "But humans don't work that way. We build informal networks based on shared interests, mutual assistance, and simple proximity. The maintenance worker who I helped fix a broken air recycler doesn't think of me as a formal ally, but he trusts me enough to listen when I suggest that certain systems might need special attention." The extraction team's communications were becoming increasingly frantic. Whatever obstacles they were encountering were clearly beyond their contingency planning. The sound of heavy equipment being deployed suggested they were attempting to breach barriers that had never been designed to stop civilian evacuations, but were proving remarkably effective against military-grade infiltration attempts. "The really elegant part," Marcus said with obvious satisfaction, "is that I haven't actually broken any rules. Everything I've done falls within the parameters of normal student behavior. I've been helpful, curious, and social, exactly what the cultural integration protocols recommended." He paused, his smile widening. "I just did it with a level of systematic thoroughness that most species wouldn't consider necessary for academic success." Kexville's enhanced systems were now detecting changes throughout the station that went far beyond simple system malfunctions. The patterns suggested coordinated action by multiple individuals with detailed knowledge of New Geneva Station's operational requirements. Whoever was assisting the human had access to administrative systems, maintenance protocols, and security networks. "This is impressive," the assassin admitted, his tactical assessment protocols forcing acknowledgement of the human's capabilities. "But ultimately irrelevant. My mission parameters account for resistance. The extraction will proceed." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Oh, I'm sure you have backup plans. Professional operations always do. But here's the thing, so do I." The lights flickered once, then stabilized in a new pattern that cast strange shadows around the room. The air circulation shifted again, creating pressure differentials that made everyone's ears pop slightly. And from somewhere deep in the station's core came a new sound, the harmonic resonance of massive mechanical systems aligning themselves for purposes they had never been designed to serve. "Because while you were planning to extract us," Marcus said, his voice carrying anticipation that was almost predatory, "I was planning to make sure that extraction was the last thing anyone would want to attempt." And in that moment, as station-wide systems began implementing contingencies that had been months in the making, everyone in Classroom 7 Delta realized that they were about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. A human teenager who had turned an entire space station into a weapon pointed at anyone foolish enough to threaten his friends. The moment when everything changed came not with dramatic explosions or brilliant flashes of light, but with the subtle click of a maintenance hatch opening in the floor behind Thokmar's seat. The young granite-born's rocky exterior immediately darkened to maximum defensive coloration as a figure emerged from the station's infrastructure networks with the fluid efficiency of someone who belonged there. Chief Maintenance Supervisor Yuki Tanaka was 63 years old, stood barely 5 feet tall, and possessed the kind of practical competence that kept space stations operational in environments that were constantly trying to kill everyone aboard. She was also, as it happened, the second human aboard New Geneva Station, a fact that had been carefully omitted from most official records for exactly the kind of situation that was currently unfolding. "Sorry I'm late," she said to Marcus, dusting off her maintenance coveralls with the casual air of someone arriving for a scheduled appointment. "Had to finish shutting down the docking bay tractor beams and rerouting the external sensor arrays." Kexville spun toward this new threat, his enhanced systems immediately analyzing the elderly human for combat capabilities. His tactical software categorized her as a low-priority target unenhanced civilian, no visible weapons, physical parameters well below species average for strength and speed. His tactical software was catastrophically wrong. "Oh, good," Marcus replied, his voice carrying genuine relief. "I was wondering when you were going to make your entrance. Have you met Kexville? He's the one who's been causing all the excitement." Chief Tanaka turned her attention to the 8-foot assassin with the politely interested expression of someone evaluating a particularly unusual maintenance request. "Zephyrian military modifications, third-generation bioenhancement suite, neural interface package probably sourced from the Hellion black market," she observed clinically. "Nice work, but I can see at least 6 critical failure points from here." The casual assessment, delivered in the tone of a professional critique, sent chills through everyone in the room except Marcus. The human student simply nodded as if he had expected exactly this analysis. "Yuki's been maintaining life support systems for 40 years, Marcus explained to his bewildered classmates. "You pick up a lot of technical knowledge in that time, including how various enhancement systems interface with biological structures." Chief Tanaka was meanwhile examining the destroyed doorway with the eye of someone calculating repair requirements. "Molecular disruptor?" she asked. "That's what I figured," Marcus confirmed. "Probably military surplus from the Rigel conflict." "Definitely Rigel surplus. See the characteristic edge pattern on the metal? That's from a Mark VII field generator." She turned back to Kexville with the patient expression of someone about to explain why his warranty had expired. "Those units have a critical overheating flaw when operated outside manufacturer specifications. Keep using it without proper cooling cycles, and the containment matrix will destabilize." Kexville's optical implants registered elevated temperature readings from his weapon systems. The human was correct. Extended use without maintenance protocols would indeed risk catastrophic failure. But that information shouldn't have been available to civilian maintenance personnel. "How did you?" he began. "Oh, we've had to clean up after a few disruptor malfunctions over the years," Chief Tanaka said dismissively. "Nasty business, molecular-level explosions. Takes forever to properly decontaminate an area afterward." From the corridor came the sound of the extraction team encountering another obstacle. This time, it was the unmistakable whine of security barriers that were not only sealed, but actively electrified. The frustrated voices speaking urgent Zephyrian suggested that whatever backup plans they had were proving inadequate. "Speaking of cleaning up messes," Chief Tanaka continued, "Marcus mentioned you might be planning to take some of our students on an unscheduled field trip. I'm afraid that's not going to be possible." Her tone was exactly the same as she might use to explain why a particular maintenance request couldn't be accommodated due to scheduling conflicts. But the words carried implications that made everyone in the room suddenly pay very close attention. "The station is currently operating under emergency protocols," she continued matter-of-factly. "All external docking systems have been disabled. Transportation networks are locked down. Life support is configured for siege mode. which means we can maintain current atmospheric conditions for approximately 6 months without any external resources. Marcus's classmates exchanged glances that ranged from amazement to terror. The implications of what they were hearing went far beyond simple academic crisis. The entire station had been transformed into a fortress, and they were witnessing it happen from the inside. More importantly, Chief Tanaka added, we've implemented full communication isolation. No signals in or out except through specifically authorized channels. Whatever organization sent you won't be receiving status updates or extraction confirmations. Kexful's enhanced systems confirmed what the human was saying. His communication links with his handlers had gone completely silent. His extraction team's coordination frequencies were being jammed, and even his internal systems were reporting interference with their standard operational protocols. This is impossible, he said, though his voice carried more confusion than conviction. Station security doesn't have the authority to implement such measures. These protocols require authorization from the Galactic Educational Consortium's Emergency Council. Chief Tanaka and Marcus exchanged a look that contained entire conversations worth of shared understanding. Well, Marcus said thoughtfully, that's where things get interesting. You see, when humans first applied to join the Galactic Educational Consortium, there was a lot of debate about whether our species could be trusted in civilian educational environments. He gestured around the classroom as if indicating evidence for his point. Some species argued that Deathworlders were inherently too dangerous. Others maintained that educational integration was essential for long-term interspecies cooperation. Chief Tanaka nodded. The compromise was to allow a limited exchange program with extensive safety protocols and emergency contingencies. But the thing about humans is that we read the fine print. Professor Vexhai felt a chill of comprehension. Her forearms began moving in patterns that indicated rapid calculation and growing concern. What exactly did the fine print say? Oh, standard bureaucratic language, Marcus replied casually. Authorization for human personnel to implement emergency protective measures if student safety was threatened. Provision for enhanced security protocols during crisis situations. Authority to coordinate with station systems for the protection of human exchange participants. The words sounded innocuous enough, but their implications were staggering. Every alien in the room with sufficient legal training was beginning to understand that the humans had been granted emergency powers that went far beyond what anyone had realized. The beautiful part, Chief Tanaka added with professional satisfaction, is that all the authorization codes and system access permissions were properly filed and approved. We just didn't mention that enhanced security protocols included the ability to turn an entire space station into an impregnable fortress. From deep within the station came a new sound, the thrumming of massive defensive systems coming online. Energy barriers, automated defensive turrets, and combat-grade shield generators that most civilians never knew existed were powering up with the methodical efficiency of military hardware. You see, Marcus continued, humans have been building fortifications for thousands of years. We understand defense in depth, overlapping fields of fire, resource management during siege conditions, and psychological warfare against besieging forces. His smile was no longer entirely friendly. We also understand that the best defense is often a good offense. Kexful's enhanced systems were now registering readings that defied rational analysis. The station's power output had increased by orders of magnitude. Sensor arrays that had been passive monitoring systems were now active scanning networks capable of tracking objects across multiple star systems. Most concerning of all, what he had assumed were standard navigation and communication satellites were revealing themselves to be weapons platforms of distinctly military specification. The thing about space stations, Chief Tanaka explained with the patient tone of someone conducting a technical briefing, is that they're already equipped with everything you need to build serious defensive capabilities. Massive power generation systems, sophisticated sensor networks, precision manufacturing facilities, and enough raw materials to construct whatever additional hardware might be required. She gestured toward the ceiling as if indicating the vast structure surrounding them. New Geneva Station was officially classified as an educational facility. What the paperwork didn't mention was that it was an educational facility built to military standards by a species that considers overkill to be a design philosophy. The extraction team's communications were now completely silent. Either their equipment had failed entirely, or they had encountered obstacles that required their full attention to overcome. Based on the subtle vibrations coming through the deck plating, the latter seemed more likely. "So," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied air of someone whose long-term planning had paid off. "Let's discuss your situation, Kexful. You came here expecting to find a classroom full of helpless students guarded by minimal security. Instead, you found yourself trapped inside a fortress controlled by humans who have had months to prepare for exactly this scenario." He counted off points on his fingers with cheerful efficiency. "Your extraction team is cut off and facing defensive systems they weren't trained to handle. Your communication links are jammed. Your weapons are operating at the edge of their safe parameters. Your escape routes have been systematically eliminated." A fourth finger joined the count. "And most importantly, you're dealing with a species that considers tactical planning to be a recreational activity and has been preparing for hostile contact since before we left our homeworld." Chief Tanaka nodded approvingly. "The boy's been an excellent student, really understands systems integration and contingency development." Around the room, alien students who had spent months thinking of Marcus as a slightly exotic but fundamentally harmless classmate were beginning to understand that they had never truly known him at all. The friendly human who helped with homework and shared snacks was also apparently a strategic planner capable of turning an entire space station into a weapon. "What do you want?" Kexville asked. His voice had lost the commanding tones of earlier and taken on the flat resignation of someone whose tactical options had been systematically eliminated. Marcus appeared to consider the question seriously. "Well, what I'd really like is to finish our lesson on conflict resolution among primitive species. Professor Vexhai was about to cover some fascinating material about how different cultures approach threat assessment and response strategies." He gestured toward the destroyed doorway, where the sounds of the extraction team's continued difficulties provided a practical audio backdrop to his point. "But since you've provided us with such an excellent real-world case study, I suppose we could use this as a learning opportunity instead." His smile was brilliant and terrifying. After all, the best education combines theory with practical application. And in that moment, as the most advanced defensive systems in known space continued powering up around them, everyone in Classroom 7 Delta realized that they were witnessing something that would change galactic history forever. The moment when humanity stopped pretending to be just another member species and started demonstrating exactly why Deathworld predators made such dangerous allies. The galaxy was about to learn that when humans said they came in peace, it wasn't a promise. It was a warning.